There was, a few of you may recall, some 10 years ago, an earthquake felt in the county of Badham, that dark and backwards county which spraddles the gloomy peaks of Bennexelsis and Angel Crag, with the city of Marley to the east and the vast forest of Ewell to the west. My dear friend Nicholas Carroll spent every Christmas in Badham, tucked up cosy at Tidwinsworth, where his surrogate father, one Mortimer Halliday, lived, or I suppose still lives. Of course, Carroll now winters with me each year, having not once set foot across the Badham county line since the time of the tremors. It was not the earthquake itself which put him off the place, nor Halliday, you understand, but rather the events which followed the rumble, and especially the night of that Christmas Eve, so many years past. It is from Carroll that this peculiar tale comes, and I have set it down, as best I can, with accuracy in the forefront of my mind, so that any inquiry into its veracity and truth may not be muddied by exaggeration or invention of mine own imagination. As for Carroll himself, he has not spoken on the matter again since his sole telling of it, and I do not wish to press him, for the sake of his nerves as well as mine. The story of the quake itself is somewhat mundane, and is of course a narrative accessible to anyone who has a friend or relative in Knowlesbridge or Marley or Bauble Pond. But I shall outline the particular damages and disruptions it wrought on the house of Tidwinsworth by way of illuminating the scene. Halliday, the famous ex-spymaster, who by all accounts was, or is, a nice man, despite featuring heavily on the naughty list of many a foreign government, lived, or lives, in the oldest house of the village. So old is that place in Tidwinsworth that it even predates the vast holly bush, the holly tree, which gives its name to that most ancient byway, Holly Lane, which runs up from the posts of its yawning drive. Being of such age and frailty, the house did not weather the earthquake particularly well, and amongst other things, the oaken porch came down, a series of windows were smashed, the beams in Halliday's bedroom gave way and delivered the attic to his most immediate convenience, and all things unbroken were left all the same, gawkishly crooked and asunder. The glass decorations had tumbled from a jolly Christmas tree, and now formed a shimmering puddle at its skirts that would draw the blood should one go splashing in it. But Halliday was, Carroll explained to me, entirely at his ease, and in no way at all stressed by the destruction. He said that the house was a hodgepodge as it was, and throughout its history had been built and rebuilt and overbuilt, demolished, replaced and chopped and changed, and the creaky old place could surely withstand a few more rounds of this particular kind of brush burn before it need be abandoned. The only real issue which the pair could identify was the matter of the cold. With holes in the roof, windows gaping wide, doors no longer fitting in their frames, winter was making its move, and invading the place with the first silver vanguards of its perilous breath. They made an HQ for themselves in the study, for the chimney above it was a survivor, and a fire could be lit quite safely and most welcomely. It was decided, too, that Carroll was to make this room his bedchamber for the time being, and he constructed a little nest on the worn velvet of a couch. Halliday surely saw the whole affair as an adventure, and dear Nicholas, too, had to agree that things had quite suddenly evolved into an unexpected but rather cheerful camping trip, and they laughed heartily and drank warming sherry, toasting chestnuts and singing together. It was 4 days till Christmas. Mortimer Halliday moved into a little used storage closet on the second floor, previously reserved for mouldering crates, dusty furniture and slowly rotting memories, dragging his mattress from out of the carnage of his old room and setting up a cot of a kind between a stack of old paintings in peeling gilt frames and a silent grandfather clock draped over by a grey sheet. It was cold here too, but the flue from the study's fireplace traversed one wall and kept it habitable enough. Despite this shivering inequity of temperature, Carroll told me how he envied Halliday his new quarters. The awkward little cupboard, you see, was lit by the most enormous and fantastic of antique windows. It had come from a workshop or factory up on the slopes of Angel Crag, Halliday elucidated, one of the many peculiar pieces which made up this idiosyncratic montage of a mansion. From what era the window in its workshop hailed he could not say, but was certain that the original building was long since gone, and that Carroll had little hope of finding its ruin, for the snow lay thick and formidable on the mountain. But my friend Nicholas wasn't so much interested in its provenance as he was ensorcelled by the vista it offered. The glass was of such a vintage that it was hazy and rippled, and made the exterior world appear like a landscape from a dream. The light caught its imperfections and softly glowed as sweeping waves across the scene of fields and zigzag lanes. On the horizon could be seen the tower of Marley Cathedral, wavering, and this view he envied the most. They walked the ancient Holly Lane together to visit the cathedral 3 days till Christmas, and to see how well Marley had fared the earthquake. On the whole, the city was intact, though the streets were a litter of broken roof slates and shattered chimney pots. The cathedral too was in pretty good order, except for on its western side, where a modern extension had all but been obliterated. Proof, Halliday had giggled, that our contemporary masons are no match for their medieval predecessors. They don't make 'em like they used to, Carroll was forced to agree. Where the extension had come down, a strange portal had been uncovered in the original wall of the cathedral. A hagioscope, old man Halliday had explained to the baffled groundskeeper whom had joined their exploration. A peephole, he continued, for the leprous and diseased who were barred entry to the building proper for fear of infection. I wager that many a hoarse prayer for healing has been whispered here, and many a blazing eye is peered through in the hopes of seeing the bearded face of salvation. The discovery provided enough conversation to last Carroll and Halliday all the way back up Holly Lane and to the chilly embrace of the house at Tidwinsworth. Here, and later, a somewhat squiffy Mortimer then firmly put to bed Nicholas's jealousy of his room with an unusual complaint from the night before. He told how he was disturbed in the night, not by the cold or the creaking of the well-shaken timbers, but by a light which kept dancing across his face from some unknown source across the gloom. Poachers, Carroll suggested, men in the fields, I mean, with lanterns. Maybe even a workman's torch from the tower of the cathedral. But Halliday rejected all ideas. Not only was the light he'd seen of such a unique quality, not being the orange of a torch or the yellow of a lantern, but moreover the red gold of an ember. But it also came not from outside the window, but rather from, somehow, inside the wall. A few more sherries, and it was chalked up as a mystery, though both men agreed that Halliday was far too rational a man for it to have been a dream. Besides, next morning, 2 days till Christmas, he complained of it again, and it is rare for such a dream as that to be recurrent. No, something odd was going on in Halliday's cupboard, and Nicholas, who here became very grave in his narration, was soon to experience a phenomenon of his own, which proved it. He went up to admire that view which he so adored, to peer through the wobbly old panes at winter in its full crystalline beauty. There was the cathedral with its hagioscope, there was the holly tree by now laden heavy with its jolly red fruits, frost on the fields, robins on the gatepost, and then Carroll heard Halliday close the front door below him and step out onto the drive. Halliday was certainly on the drive. His footsteps were loud and clear, his patent cough grumble curse rang out in the still air, and yet he did not appear in the scene through the window. Carroll leant so far forward as to bump his head on the glass, but still he could not get an angle from which to view his friend. And then he heard the telltale cough again, surely further away, over by the mouth of the drive, and yet no figure could be seen. He tried to unlatch the window and open it, but it wouldn't budge, and so he was resigned to figure that Halliday had, remarkably, turned invisible. Noticing a wry smirk of credulity which must have crept onto my attentive features, Nicholas assured me that he was not drunk at this time. And if what he was saying was not a true account, then he surely must have been in the grips of the most incredible hallucination. Not satisfied with such a fanciful explanation as invisibility, he crossed to the adjacent chamber, picked his way through broken vases and scattered books, and looked through the window there instead. And there he was, Halliday, just as he should be, smoking his pipe at the bottom of the lane. Swiftly, armed with this certainty, Carol then returned to the workshop window and, just as before, Halliday was gone. The two aspects identical except for the appearance, or lack thereof, of a smoke-shrouded Mortimer. The two men tried many experiments to test the window, once Nicholas had brought its peculiar optical trickery to Halliday's attention, and time again, the view through the glass did not quite match the reality of the situation. It was as if the landscape without was some kind of moving painting or ingenious projection, which gave every appearance of being the truth, but apparently was the mask of something quite deceitful. More than a window, it was surely a screen. The pair retired with well-scratched heads and well-pulled beards to fitful slumbers, stuffed with baffled thought and desperate scientific imaginings. But on the morn of Christmas Eve, this little mystery was compounded, and thoughts of its practical mechanics were all but forgotten. For in the night, Mortimer Halliday had divined the source of the light. During the earthquake, all the plaster next to the tricky window had fallen away, and the wall there now stood as bare stones. Between two of these stones, there was a small gap, a chink in the exterior of the house, and it was through this chink that the ember glow had shone. Investigating it closely, though, Carol and Halliday found that no daylight showed through the crack, and that beyond it was nothing but a shadowy darkness. Also, and perhaps more telling still, none of that eager winter cold which was so passionately poured in through every opening could be detected breezing its way through this particular breach. It was as if another sealed room lay beyond the wall. But of course, being the very front wall of the house, that was quite impossible. Suddenly, Halliday ran from the closet and was gone for some 5 minutes before coming back. He returned with an iron bar and the resolve that they should pry away the stone and this mystery explore, that part of his old spy's constitution that was given to action suddenly alive and alert. He had no fear of damaging the house, for it was already so damaged, and there was no real harm in risking another inlet for the cold, for it was already so cold. Thus the two men, in earnest, set about removing the stone. It crashed to the floor in a cloud of dust, and left a hole where for many hundreds of years it once had lain undisturbed. No daylight, no fields, no view at all, only a shadowy void stretched beyond the broken wall. Halliday was tempted to plunge his arm into this confounding blackness, but Carol convinced him otherwise. Feeling something. They stood a moment, trying to figure it all out. A double wall, Carol suggested, an ancient hiding place, the atelier of some monstrous rat. But of course, any reasonable explanation just did not fit. The two men began to find the unexplainable room beyond quite upsetting, as it tumbled deeper blackness into blackness. And without another word, then, they heaved up the stone, plugged the hole, and retreated in cold sweats to the warmth of the study. Halliday had seen a light through that crack in the wall. He had seen a light come from that impossible darkness. So there was, it could only follow, someone or something in there to strike such a match. "Merry Christmas," Carol nervously chuckled as he gulped a large brandy. A few brandies more on that frigid Christmas Eve, and the pair had decided on a plan. They would both sit up that night in the cupboard, facing the fraudulent wall and the deceitful window, and witness with lucid eyes and doubled courage the true facts of the matter, the definitive series of events, confront whatever Christmas miracle the shook-up old house had to offer them. And so a couple of comfortable chairs were dragged in just before sunset, and with iron bar at the ready, the trap was set, and there they sat and watched as a sharply gibbous moon rose and night descended. Midnight came and went, and the two men shivered in their wingbacks, vigilant but beginning to wane. "Perhaps it won't come," Carol said. "Maybe it knows that we're awake and won't appear." But then Halliday's knuckles grew white on the arm of his chair. His gaze was fixed on the loose stone, and Nicholas saw it too, the flicker of something behind the wall. My friend told me how he wanted to rise, to either charge the wall with the bar, or otherwise turn tail and flee, but instead found that he was quite fixed in his chair, maybe by fear and apprehension, or maybe held by forces more supernatural. Either way, he explained, the two were a captive audience when the solution to their puzzle was finally given. Just as Halliday had described, an ember-red light shone through the gap in the wall, like it was pressed up hard against the other side. And the light danced across the faces of these transfixed men, interrogating their pale features. And then it moved away, and a kind of shuffling sound could be heard echoing in the darkness. A moment's pause, and suddenly, with a rending, creaking groan, the latch of the window juddered into locomotion. It unlocked, unlatched, and moved, leaving the frame free to swing open, which it did. The moonlight outside swung with it, as if etched onto the glass, and the window opened like a door to reveal the shadow room behind the wall. The darkness really did just tumble upon tumble, stretching away into a horrifying oblivion. And from out that eternal, infernal shadow, a figure emerged, chortling to himself in a hearty baritone. A short, fat man, naked save for a wreath of mistletoe about his head, skin bright red with leprous contusions all over, and a filthy great white beard which sprouted in all directions like the twisted limbs of the old holly tree. This foul apparition cackled and danced, springing from one gnarled foot to the other, right on the threshold of the room in the frame of the window that was a screen that was a door. And he stared deep into Halliday, with his huge single eye, which was no eye at all, but rather a smouldering lump of coal, which glowed and throbbed with the very same red light they'd watched moving beyond the stone. I see you, the repulsive dwarf spat from between mincemeat brown teeth. Ho, 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 it chanted, and then without warning the window slammed shut to once more obscure him. The two men were left looking out across the fields, through the blear of their confounded eyes. Nicholas muttered something about the iron bar being used to smash the window come Christmas dawn, thus destroying the fell and eldritch portal. But then he fell silent, as silent as a man in mourning, perhaps in mourning for his sanity, or the simple loss of Christmas cheer. I wanted to know what happened next for the haunted Mortimer Halliday in the earthquake town of Tidwinsworth, but Nicholas excused himself promptly at this point, and as I've explained, the whole thing has never been spoken of again. I only retell the tale now so to explain my own behaviour, which to an ignorant party must seem quite peculiar. The sewing shut of my curtains across every window during Advent, and my indefatigable repapering, replastering, recovering of every wall for fear of gaps and defects. It started in Carol's room, of course, for the comfort of his rattled nerves, but I soon made it a habit in mine own chamber, and thence the house entire was wrapped up. No peephole is left unobscured here, for at Christmas we don't know who or what might be watching.